I memorized Dominic Bellini's drink order the first time he walked into Sapphire Lounge. Old-fashioned. Bourbon neat preference leaning toward Woodford Reserve. Exactly 2 ice cubes shaped perfectly square. Orange peel expressed over the glass but not dropped in. Cherry on a separate pick placed precisely at 2 o'clock. Sounds obsessive written out like that. But when you've tended bar for 3 years, you learn that details matter. Especially when the client tips $40 on a $20 drink and never once complains about anything. That was 8 months ago. Now it's Thursday, 10 minutes past 10 p.m., and I'm already reaching for the Woodford Reserve before he settles onto his usual stool. Second from the end. Never the corner seat despite it being objectively better for privacy. Always the one that gives him a clear view of the entrance, the kitchen door, and the emergency exit near the bathrooms. Evening, Mr. Bellini. I set the cocktail napkin down with practiced precision. Usual? Please. His voice carries that gravelly quality some men develop around their mid-30s, smooth enough to be pleasant, but textured enough to suggest he's lived through things worth mentioning. Not that he ever mentions them. Our conversations rarely extend beyond drink orders and weather observations. I turn to prepare his old-fashioned, aware that he's watching me work. Not in a creepy way. I've dealt with enough drunk businessmen pawing at my wrist to know the difference. This is something else. Assessment, maybe. Like he's cataloging the way I muddle the sugar cube, the exact angle I twist the orange peel to release the oils. Uncle Marcus says certain people just have that quality, that predatory awareness that comes from always needing to understand their environment. Busy night, Dominic observes when I place his drink down. The ice cubes clink softly against the glass. Thursdays usually are. Everyone celebrating making it through another week. I wipe down the bar in front of him, even though it's already spotless. Keeping my hands busy prevents awkward hovering. He nods, lifts the glass, takes that first measured sip he always takes. Testing. Confirming. Then a barely perceptible exhale that I've learned to interpret as approval. The thing about working at Sapphire Lounge is that you develop a sixth sense about power. Not the loud, obnoxious kind that shows up in rental tuxedos and bottles of champagne they can't actually afford. Real power. The quiet kind that makes other patrons shift their conversations to lower volumes when certain people walk past. The kind where the manager personally escorts someone to their table instead of letting the hostess handle it. Dominic Bellini has that kind of power in spades. I noticed it the 3rd or 4th time he came in. The way Marco, one of our regulars who works in commercial real estate, practically tripped over himself moving to a different section of the bar. How the 2 guys in tailored suits who'd been arguing loudly about sports teams suddenly found their indoor voices when Dominic sat down. Small tells that added up to a larger picture I deliberately chose not to examine too closely. Uncle Marcus hired me 3 years ago when I was desperate enough to take any job that paid in actual money instead of exposure or experience. I just finished my chemistry degree from Boston University. $48,000 in debt with a BA that qualified me for precisely nothing except graduate school I couldn't afford. My resume listed 3 unpaid internships, and a GPA that suggested I'd spent more time studying than networking, which in retrospect was probably my first major career mistake. Marcus took one look at me, asked if I could handle drunks without crying, and put me behind the bar the next shift. Said family helps family, especially when family is drowning. He wasn't wrong about the drowning part. Haley. Marcus appears from the back office, nods at me, then at Dominic with considerably more deference. Mr. Bellini, everything satisfactory? As always, Marcus. You run a good establishment. Dominic's tone is pleasant, almost warm. But there's something underneath it, a layer of meaning I can't quite parse, like they're having a second conversation beneath the surface of the polite words. We do our best. Let me know if you need anything. Marcus retreats, and I catch the briefest moment where his hand touches my shoulder as he passes. A warning? Reassurance? With Marcus, it's hard to tell. He's spent 30 years in Boston's restaurant scene and picked up the kind of discretion that makes him excellent at his job and maddeningly vague in personal interactions. The night continues its usual rhythm. I mix drinks, make small talk with regulars, deflect increasingly aggressive flirtation from a guy in a Patriots jersey who doesn't understand that no thanks is a complete sentence. Dominic sits at his stool nursing his drink. He never orders more than 2 in an evening. and occasionally checks his phone with the kind of focus that suggests the messages he's reading are considerably more important than sports scores or stock updates. Around 11:30, two men I don't recognize walk in. Both Asian, both wearing dark clothes that read expensive, even from across the room. They scan the space with the same predatory awareness Dominic has. And I watch his posture shift. Not obviously. Just a subtle straightening of his spine, a fractional adjustment of his shoulders that transforms relaxed into ready. The men choose a table near the front. Don't approach the bar. Don't acknowledge Dominic's presence, even though I'd bet money they clocked him the second they entered. The air in Sapphire suddenly feels thinner, like pressure dropping before a storm. Another? I ask Dominic quietly, even though his glass is still half full. No, thank you. He places 250s on the bar, which is excessive even by his standards. Have a good night, Haley. He leaves through the main entrance, and the two men at the front table watch him go without moving. 5 minutes later, they leave too. And I'm standing behind the bar, wondering what exactly I just witnessed, while simultaneously knowing I should probably forget I witnessed anything at all. That's my life. Bartending 6 nights a week at Sapphire, mixing drinks for people whose conversations I'm not supposed to hear, and whose business I'm definitely not supposed to question. Living in a studio apartment in Alston that costs $1,800 a month and has radiators that clang like church bells every morning at 6 a.m. Taking the Red Line to Quincy every Sunday to visit Mom, because that's the one day I give myself permission to stop running. Mom. Rose Turner. 52 years old and 5 years cancer-free, which should be cause for celebration, except the medical bills didn't stop when the treatments did. $68,000 in debt even after insurance, broken into monthly payments that will outlive both of us if I don't figure out how to accelerate them. That's why I took the bartending job instead of holding out for something in my actual field. Chemistry doesn't pay enough to cover rent and medical debt simultaneously, not at entry level. So I mix drinks, and I'm good at it, partially because I actually understand the science behind flavor profiles and molecular interactions. That old-fashioned I make for Dominic? The sugar-to-bitter ratio is calculated based on the specific barrel char level of Woodford Reserve. The orange oil release is timed to maximize aromatic compound dispersion without overwhelming the bourbon's natural vanilla notes. It's chemistry applied to mixology, and it turns out people will pay decent money for drinks that taste transcendent instead of just adequate. Sundays at Mom's place are my anchor point. The one routine I refuse to compromise on regardless of how tired I am, or how many double shifts Marcus needs covered. I take the train at 9 a.m., stop at the bakery she loves for cinnamon rolls she pretends she shouldn't eat, and spend 4 hours in her tiny kitchen drinking coffee and pretending life isn't crushing both of us under debt we didn't choose. She asks about work. I tell her it's fine. She asks if I'm dating. I tell her I don't have time. She asks if I'm happy. I tell her I'm working on it. All technically true statements that avoid the larger truth. I'm 26 years old, living paycheck to paycheck, using a chemistry degree as a coaster while I pour drinks for people who tip more than I make in an hour. And the only thing keeping me from complete despair is knowing that every shift brings me incrementally closer to the day when Mom's debt is paid, and I can maybe, possibly, start building a life that belongs to me instead of to circumstances I can't control. But Thursday nights at Sapphire, watching men like Dominic Bellini sit at my bar with their careful awareness and their unspoken rules, I wonder if I'm paying attention to the wrong details. If maybe the real story isn't in the chemistry of the drinks I'm making, but in the power dynamics I'm witnessing and deliberately ignoring, because knowing too much in this city has always been more dangerous than knowing too little. Thursday evening arrived with weather forecasts promising storms. By 8 p.m., water streaked the windows of Sapphire Lounge in diagonal patterns that distorted the streetlights outside into abstract smears of yellow and white. The kind of night that kept people inside longer, ordering one more drink to avoid the inevitable sprint to their cars, which meant we were packed. Every table occupied, every bar stool taken, the noise level climbing steadily as alcohol loosened inhibitions and raised volumes. I moved through my routine on autopilot. Martini, Manhattan, mojito, repeat, while tracking orders and managing the controlled chaos that came with a full house on a miserable night. 10:47. Dominic Bellini walked through the entrance flanked by two men I recognized from previous visits. Both wore dark suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Both moved with that same predatory awareness that seemed to be a job requirement in their world. But tonight something was different. Instead of heading to his usual stool at the end of the bar, Dominic chose a seat dead center. Prime real estate for conversation, terrible positioning for surveillance. The change registered immediately as wrong, like watching someone write with their opposite hand, technically functional, but fundamentally off. "Evening, Mr. Bellini." I set down 3 cocktail napkins. "Your usual? Please, and whatever these gentlemen would like." He gestured to his companions with casual authority. I took their orders, bourbon neat, scotch on the rocks, and turned to prepare the drinks while my brain tried to process the deviation from pattern. 8 months of Thursdays, always the same stool, always the same positioning. Why change tonight? The answer walked through the door 5 minutes later. Asian man, maybe early 30s, expensive dark jacket over a charcoal shirt, moving through the crowd with purpose that suggested he knew exactly where he was going and didn't care who he had to navigate around to get there. He claimed a small table near the front, waved off the server attempting to take his order, and pulled out his phone with the focused attention of someone waiting for something specific. I watched him while pouring Dominic's old-fashioned. Watched the way his gaze kept drifting to the bar, to Dominic specifically, with an intensity that made the hair on my arm stand up. Not casual interest, not even aggressive curiosity. Something colder, calculated, predatory. The man finally flagged down our server, ordered something I couldn't hear over the ambient noise, then had a brief conversation that involved gesturing toward Dominic. Money changed hands. The server nodded, disappeared toward the bar where Jake was handling the overflow orders. Alarm bells started ringing in my head before I consciously understood why. Jake prepared the drink. Looked like another old-fashioned from my angle. And the server carried it toward Dominic's section with a professional smile. I caught fragments of her explanation as she approached. Courtesy of an admirer. Gentleman at table 6. Wanted to welcome you. Dominic's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted fractionally. Recognition. Assessment. The kind of instant calculation that came from years of navigating situations where gifts might be genuine, or might be traps. The server placed the glass on a cocktail napkin in front of him. The liquid caught the overhead lights, amber and rich, ice cubes floating in geometric precision. Dominic nodded his thanks, reached for the drink, lifted it toward his lips, and that's when I saw it. The color was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not the kind of thing a casual observer would notice. But I'd made thousands of old fashions, understood the precise hue that resulted from proper bourbon to bitters ratio, knew exactly how light should refract through properly mixed spirits. This drink had turbidity, a faint cloudiness disrupting the usual clarity, barely visible but definitely present. Bourbon doesn't cloud. Not unless something's been added that shouldn't be there. Something that doesn't fully dissolve, that creates microscopic particles suspended in solution. My chemistry training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. Turbidity in alcohol meant adulterants, foreign substances, poison. I was moving before I decided to move. "Don't drink that." The words tore from my throat loud enough to cut through conversation, loud enough to make heads turn from 3 tables away. My legs carried me around the bar in a stumbling sprint that knocked into a customer's elbow, sent someone's beer sloshing over the rim of their glass. Dominic's hand froze with the drink inches from his mouth. His eyes found mine across the space, sharp and alert and questioning. I reached him, slapped the glass from his grip with enough force that it flew sideways, tumbled through air in slow motion, exploded against the polished wood floor in a burst of liquid and crystalline fragments that scattered across tile like shrapnel. Silence crashed down over Sapphire Lounge with physical weight. Every conversation stopped. Every person within visual range turned to stare at the bartender who'd just assaulted a customer's drink with the kind of violence usually reserved for defending lives. My chest heaved. Adrenaline flooded my system so completely I could taste metal on my tongue. Dominic stared at me with an expression I couldn't parse. Surprise, maybe, mixed with something harder to define. The color, I gasped, words tumbling over each other in desperate explanation. The drink. It had turbidity. Bourbon doesn't cloud unless something's been added. Something that doesn't fully dissolve. I saw particles in suspension. Microscopic but definitely present. Basic chemistry. Pure solutions don't show turbidity unless foreign substances interfere with light transmission. I was rambling. Knew I was rambling. Couldn't stop. Whatever was in that glass, it wasn't just bourbon and bitters. Someone put something in it. Dominic's gaze shifted from me to the shattered glass on the floor, then to table 6 where the Asian man was already standing. Moving toward the exit with controlled speed that didn't quite qualify as running, but definitely suggested urgent departure. Stop him. Dominic's voice carried absolute authority despite conversational volume. One of his companions materialized near the entrance with speed that seemed impossible given the crowded space. The Asian man altered course, tried the emergency exit near the bathrooms. The second companion was already there, blocking escape with body language that communicated threat more effectively than weapons. The Asian man stopped, raised his hands in a placating gesture, started speaking in rapid syllables I couldn't understand but recognized as some dialect of Chinese. Dominic stood, moved toward the confrontation with unhurried precision. I stayed frozen beside the broken glass, my brain finally catching up to what my body had done, the implications spreading through my consciousness like ink in water. I'd just stopped someone from poisoning Dominic Bellini, which meant someone wanted Dominic Bellini dead, which meant I'd just inserted myself into the kind of situation people disappeared for witnessing. Marcus appeared from the back office, his expression cycling through confusion, alarm, and resignation in the span of 3 seconds. Haley, what? The drink was poisoned. My voice sounded distant, disconnected from my body. I saw contamination, turbidity in the solution. Someone tried to kill him. Marcus's face went pale. He looked at Dominic, at the Asian man now surrounded by very large men in very expensive suits, at the broken glass, then back to me. Office. Now. Not yet. Dominic's voice cut through the chaos. He approached me with measured steps, stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head to maintain eye contact. How did you know? Chemistry degree. The answer came automatically. Boston University. Graduated 3 years ago. I understand solution dynamics, molecular suspension, light refraction through various compounds. That drink showed turbidity consistent with undissolved particulate matter. Bourbon shouldn't do that. Nothing in a properly made old-fashioned should cause that reaction. His expression shifted. Surprise, definitely. But also something else. Respect, maybe. Or calculation. You're certain? Yes. I've made thousands of these drinks. I know what they should look like at molecular level. That wasn't right. Dominic nodded once, then gestured to one of his companions. Collect what you can of the glass and liquid. I want laboratory analysis within the hour. To the Asian man, we'll be having a conversation, just not here. The man was escorted out through the emergency exit. The remaining patrons gradually resumed their conversations, though the volume stayed muted, everyone still processing the scene they'd witnessed. Dominic turned back to me. Thank you, Haley. 2 words. Simple gratitude. But the way he said my name carried weight I didn't fully understand. Recognition that went beyond bartender-customer dynamics into territory I wasn't prepared to navigate. You're welcome, I managed. He retrieved his wallet, placed $500 bills on the bar. Excessive didn't begin to cover it. Have a safe night. Then he was gone, disappearing through the entrance with his remaining companion, leaving me standing beside broken glass and the slowly dawning realization that I'd just saved a man's life and possibly destroyed my own in the process. Marcus's office smelled like stale coffee and old paperwork. He closed the door behind us with more force than necessary, the kind of controlled slam that communicated anger without crossing into unprofessional. I stood in the middle of the cramped space, still shaking from adrenaline, while he paced behind his desk like a caged animal searching for an exit that didn't exist. You want to tell me what the hell just happened out there? His voice stayed level, but tension bled through every syllable. Someone tried to poison Dominic Bellini. I saw the contamination in the drink, turbidity in solution that shouldn't be there. Basic chemistry. I know about the chemistry, Haley. Marcus stopped pacing, braced both hands on his desk, looked at me with an expression caught between concern and resignation. What I need to know is if you understand what you just did. I stopped someone from being murdered in your bar. You stopped someone from being murdered in his bar. Marcus's correction carried weight I was only beginning to comprehend. Dominic Bellini doesn't just frequent Sapphire Lounge, Haley. He owns it. Has for 7 years. I manage it for him. But this place exists under his protection, operates within his territory, pays him percentages of profits in exchange for security. The words landed like physical blows. You're saying he's head of the Bellini family organization, one of the most powerful crime syndicates on the East Coast. Controls shipping, ports, various business interests, both legitimate and otherwise. Marcus pulled out his chair, collapsed into it like confession had drained something vital from his body. I found out 2 years ago when some idiots tried to extort protection money from us. Thought Sapphire was independent, vulnerable. They were very, very wrong. My legs decided sitting was a good idea. I found the chair across from Marcus's desk, lowered myself into it carefully. And you never thought to mention this? Would you have wanted to know? Would that knowledge have made your life easier or more complicated? He had a point. I hired you because you needed work and your family. I kept you ignorant, because ignorance is the safest position for civilians in this world. But you just threw yourself directly into the middle of something that could get you killed, and I can't protect you from consequences I don't control. The office door opened without knocking. Dominic Bellini filled the doorframe with the kind of presence that made the already small space feel suffocating. He looked at Marcus first, some unspoken communication passing between them, then turned his attention to me. May I have a moment with Haley? Not really a question despite the phrasing. Marcus stood. I'll be at the bar if you need me. He touched my shoulder as he passed. Brief pressure that communicated solidarity, or sympathy, or maybe just goodbye. Then it was just Dominic and me in an office that suddenly felt more like an interrogation room. The preliminary analysis confirmed your assessment, Dominic said, settling into the chair Marcus had vacated. The drink contained tetrodotoxin. Extremely rare, extremely lethal. Derived from pufferfish, nearly impossible to trace, causes paralysis followed by respiratory failure within minutes. Without your intervention, I would have been dead before an ambulance arrived. Tetrodotoxin. The lab also noted the toxin was delivered in microencapsulated carriers, cyclodextrin shells that don't fully dissolve in high-proof spirits, so the dose left a faint haze under the bar lights. That's the turbidity you saw. I'd studied it in biochemistry. Sodium channel blocker. No antidote. Mortality rate above 70% even with immediate medical intervention. The Yakuza use pufferfish toxin traditionally. You know your poisons. Something that might have been approval flickered across his expression. The man we detained is affiliated with the Yamaguchi branch operating out of Los Angeles. They've been attempting to establish East Coast presence for the past 6 months. Eliminating me would destabilize territory control, create openings they could exploit. So this is about business. This is always about business. Power, territory, money. The same motivations that drive any organization, legal or otherwise. Just with different methods of conflict resolution. Dominic leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on knees, eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. Which brings us to your situation. You witnessed an attempted assassination. More problematically, you prevented it. The Yakuza don't leave witnesses alive, especially witnesses who cost them strategic opportunities. Cold spread through my chest. You're saying they'll come after me. I'm saying they're already looking for you. Finding your identity won't take long. You work here publicly. Marcus's relationship to you is documented through employment records. By tomorrow morning, they'll know your name, address, daily routines, vulnerabilities. He paused. Including your mother and Quincy. The mention of Mom sent ice directly into my veins. My mother has nothing to do with this. Leverage rarely does. They'll use whatever pressure points ensure cooperation or silence. In this case, probably both. Dominic's voice stayed neutral, factual, like he was explaining weather patterns instead of death threats. I've already positioned security outside your apartment and your mother's residence. Discreet surveillance, enough to discourage immediate action but not enough to guarantee safety long term. Why would you do that? Because you saved my life. That creates obligations I take seriously. He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, set it on the desk between us. This is my private number. If anything seems wrong, if you notice anyone following you, if your instincts tell you danger is present, you call me immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't second guess. Don't try to handle it yourself. I stared at the card. Simple black printing on white stock. No title. Just a name and number. And then what? You protect me forever? I just live under guard because I happen to recognize poison in a drink. Ideally, I resolve the Yakuza problem before it escalates further. They've violated territorial agreements, committed acts of aggression that cannot go unanswered. I'll handle it through channels they understand. The way he said handle suggested methods I probably didn't want detailed. In the meantime, yes, you accept protection, because the alternative is hoping men with no regard for civilian casualties choose mercy. The logic was sound, even if everything about the situation felt surreal. I need to call my mother. I'd recommend that. Tonight. She should know to be cautious even if you can't explain everything. Dominic stood, adjusted his jacket with practiced precision. Marcus will give you the rest of the night off. Go home. Lock your doors. Keep your phone charged. I'll be in touch tomorrow with updates. He was gone before I could formulate responses to the 100 questions crowding my mind. Marcus appeared minutes later, handed me my jacket and purse without comment. Take tomorrow off too. I'll cover your shifts. Marcus, this isn't negotiable, Haley. Whatever's about to happen, you need to be somewhere safe while it unfolds. And you need to trust that Dominic Bellini, for all his moral complications, keeps his word when he offers protection. The drive back to my Alston apartment happened in a fog. Autopilot navigation while my brain tried processing revelations that didn't fit into any framework I'd constructed for understanding my life. I'd been working in a bar owned by organized crime, serving drinks to a man who controlled territory through violence and intimidation, living in willful ignorance that now felt less like protection and more like complicity. My studio apartment had never felt more vulnerable. Ground floor, windows facing the street, lock on the door that probably wouldn't survive determined force. I checked every room anyway, all 2 of them plus the bathroom, before settling on my bed with my phone clutched in both hands. 9:47 p.m. Late, but not too late. Mom stayed up until 11 most nights, reading or watching those crime procedurals she found oddly comforting. She answered on the second ring. Haley, everything okay? Yeah. No. I mean, I'm fine, but I need to tell you something and I need you not to panic. Great start. Really reassuring. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. Something happened at work tonight. Nothing involving me directly, but there might be some complications. For safety reasons, there are going to be some men keeping an eye on your house for the next few days. They won't bother you. They're just there to make sure nobody bothers you. Silence stretched long enough that I checked the screen to confirm we hadn't been disconnected. Then, men watching my house. Haley, what kind of trouble are you in? Not trouble exactly. More like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw something I shouldn't have. The people who own the bar where I work are handling it, but they want to make sure I'm safe. And you're safe. As a precaution. The people who own the bar. Mom's voice shifted into that tone she'd used when I was 16, and came home past curfew with explanations that didn't quite add up. Are these people dangerous, Haley? They're complicated, but they're not a threat to us. If anything, they're preventing other people from being threats. Technically true, if misleading by omission. Another long silence. I want you to come stay with me. Tonight. I can't. I need to stay in Boston for work, but I'll call you every day. Morning and evening. I promise. And if anything feels wrong, if you see anyone suspicious, you call me immediately and then you call the police. This is insane. I know. I'm sorry. I wish I could explain better, but I don't fully understand it myself yet. Just, please trust me that I'm being careful, and the people watching your house are there to help. We talked for another 20 minutes, Mom cycling through worry and anger and resignation, before eventually accepting that I wasn't going to provide more details than I already had. By the time we hung up, My hands were cramping from gripping the phone too hard and my jaw ached from clenching teeth. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, listening to street noises filter through inadequate windows, wondering how my life had shifted so completely in the span of 4 hours. This morning, I'd been a bartender with chemistry degree paying off medical debt through tips and minimum wage. Tonight, I was apparently under the protection of organized crime because I'd recognized poison and made the instinctive decision to prevent murder. Somewhere outside, men I'd never met watched my building. Across town, other men watched Mom's house in Quincy. And in some location I couldn't identify, Dominic Bellini was probably orchestrating responses to territorial violations using methods that would never appear in any legal filing. I'd saved a life tonight. That should have felt uncomplicated. Heroic even. Instead, it felt like I'd stepped through a door that locked behind me, into a room with no clear exits and rules I didn't understand. All I could do now was trust that the man whose life I'd saved would honor his word about keeping me alive long enough to regret my good deed, or not regret it. That remained to be determined. Carlo Ricci became my shadow on Friday morning. It was late November. Boston felt like steel and salt. I noticed him immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe late 30s, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket that probably concealed more than just protection from Boston's November chill. He positioned himself across the street from my building at 7 a.m., leaning against a lamppost with the casual posture of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt oddly reassured. Visible security meant Dominic was serious about protection. It also meant the threat was real enough to require it. The routine established itself quickly. Carlo followed me to the corner store, to the coffee shop, maintained 20 feet of distance that suggested professional surveillance rather than amateur stalking. By Friday evening, I'd stopped checking over my shoulder constantly. By Saturday morning, I nodded acknowledgement when our paths crossed at the entrance to my building. He nodded back, first hint of human interaction breaking through operational protocol. Sunday, I broke pattern. Took the red line to Quincy for my weekly visit with Mom, Carlo trailing 2 cars behind on the train. Mom noticed him through her kitchen window, standing near the park across from her house, with phone in hand like he belonged there. "That one of your watchers?" She set down her coffee mug, with enough force to make liquid slosh over the rim. "His name's Carlo. He's been following me for 3 days. Very professional about it. I tried for light, conversational. Failed spectacularly. This is insane, Haley. I know, but it won't be forever. Just until things settle. I had no idea if that was true. How are you feeling? Any problems with the house?" We spent the next hour pretending normalcy, while both of us watched Carlo through windows, tracking his position like he was weather we couldn't control, but desperately needed to predict. When I left, Mom hugged me longer than usual, the kind of embrace that communicated worry words couldn't adequately express. Monday, Dominic appeared at my apartment building around noon. I was heading out for groceries when his black SUV pulled to the curb, passenger window rolling down with mechanical precision. "Get in. I'll drive you." Not a request. Carlo materialized beside the vehicle, opened the back door for me with practiced efficiency. I climbed in, suddenly hyper-aware that this was the first time I'd been in an enclosed space with Dominic Bellini, outside of professional contexts. The interior smelled like expensive leather, and something woodsy. Cologne, maybe. Subtle enough to be pleasant, rather than overwhelming. Dominic drove with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, navigating Boston traffic with familiarity that suggested these streets were as known to him as the back of his own hand. "How are you holding up?" He asked it casually, like we were discussing weather rather than my adjustment to living under armed guard. "Fine. Adjusting. Your guy Carlo is very good at his job. He'd better be. I've trusted him with my life more times than I can count." Brief pause. "How's your mother?" Terrified, pretending she's not. Standard Turner family coping mechanism. I watch storefronts blur past my window. She keeps asking questions I can't answer because I don't know the answers myself. Ask them. I'll answer what I can. So I did. "How long does this last? The security, the watching, the living like I'm in witness protection without actually being in witness protection?" Until I've resolved the territorial dispute with the Yakuza. Could be weeks. Could be months. Depends on how quickly they accept that crossing into my territory has consequences they're unwilling to pay. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. I'm working on expediting the process. The way he said expediting suggested methods I definitely didn't want detailed. And what happens after? I just go back to normal? Pretend this never happened? You go back to whatever version of normal you choose, with the understanding that you've seen things most civilians don't see, know things most civilians don't know. That knowledge doesn't disappear. He turned onto my street, parked in a loading zone with the kind of confidence that suggested parking tickets were irrelevant concerns. But yes, eventually this ends and you reclaim your life. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been circling my mind since Thursday night. That scar on your chin. How'd you get it? His hand moved unconsciously to touch the vertical line bisecting his jawline. Bicycle accident when I was 7. Thought I could jump a curb at full speed. Learned physics doesn't care about confidence. Almost smiled. My father said it taught me valuable lessons about consequences and gravity. Your father ran the organization before you? For 30 years. Until someone decided territory disputes required permanent solutions. No emotion in his voice. Just flat statement of fact. I was 27 when I inherited responsibilities I wasn't prepared for. Learned fast because the alternative was losing everything he'd built. The vulnerability surprised me. This wasn't the controlled crime boss from Thursday night or the calculated protector from subsequent conversations. This was someone who'd been thrust into power through violence and adapted because survival demanded it. You were married? I already knew this from his earlier mention. But something about the enclosed space made personal questions feel less intrusive. Anna? Met her at a charity function. Married 6 months later. She died 3 years ago in a car accident on Route 93. Drunk driver crossed the median during evening rush hour. His jaw tightened fractionally. She wanted normal life. House in the suburbs, kids, distance from family business. I kept promising soon, after this deal, after that consolidation. Always soon. Never now. I'm sorry. So am I. He shifted to look at me directly. Why chemistry? You clearly have the aptitude for it, but you're tending bar instead of working in labs. What happened? Debt happened. Mom's medical bills, my student loans, the reality that entry-level chemistry positions don't pay enough to cover both rent and monthly payments exceeding $1,000. So I took the job that paid immediately and told myself it was temporary. I shrugged. 3 years later, temporary has become permanent. What would you do with chemistry if debt wasn't a factor? Nobody had asked me that in years. The question hit harder than it should have. Research, probably. Molecular synthesis, pharmaceutical applications. Something that mattered beyond making drinks taste good. I paused. Not that there's anything wrong with mixology. I just wanted more. Wanting more isn't a character flaw, Haley. It's human. The conversation shifted after that, becoming easier somehow. He asked about my degree program. I asked about his whiskey distillation hobby. He explained the science of barrel aging. I corrected his understanding of chemical reactions during fermentation. The exchange felt natural, like we were just two people discussing shared interests rather than crime boss and bartender navigating impossible circumstances. Tuesday, Dominic showed up at my apartment again. Wednesday, he took me to lunch at a place that definitely didn't take reservations from anyone else. By Wednesday evening, the awareness between us had shifted from professional to something more complicated. I noticed details I shouldn't notice. The way his hands moved when explaining concepts, precise and deliberate. How his voice dropped fractionally when he was being genuine versus when he was maintaining public persona. The exact shade of his eyes, not quite brown, not quite amber. Something in between that changed with lighting. He noticed things about me too. Caught the way I bit my lower lip when processing information. How I organized drinks ingredients by molecular weight without conscious thought. That I always checked exit routes before settling into any space. Habit learned from watching him do the same thing. The tension built through proximity. His hand brushing mine when passing documents explaining territorial boundaries. Standing close enough in crowds that I could feel his body heat. Conversations that lasted longer than necessary. finding excuses to maintain connection. But I fought it. Reminded myself daily that Dominic Bellini represented everything I'd spent my life avoiding. Violence, crime, moral ambiguity that couldn't be reconciled with the black and white ethics I'd always assumed guided my decisions. Thursday night, the 4th day of Carlo's protection, I walked to the corner bodega at 9 p.m. for milk I didn't actually need. Just wanted air, movement, brief illusion of normalcy. Carlo trailed behind as usual, maintaining his professional 20-foot distance. They came from the alley between buildings, 2 men moving fast, one grabbing my arm with enough force to leave bruises I'd discover later. I didn't scream. Didn't have time. Training from self-defense classes I'd taken in college kicked in, dropped my weight, twisted, broke the grip through leverage rather than strength. The second man produced a gun, not pointed at me, pointed at Carlo, who'd closed distance the second violence started. Move, and she's the one who gets hurt. English with accent I couldn't place through the adrenaline flooding my system. Carlo froze, calculated odds faster than I could process them, made a decision that would have been suicidal if he hadn't been that good at his job. He moved. The next 10 seconds happened in that strange, slow-motion state where time dilates and details become hyper-real. Carlo's hand going for the weapon under his jacket. The sharp crack of gunfire, impossibly loud, reverberating off brick walls. The second attacker going down. The first one releasing me, reaching for his own weapon. More shots. Pain blooming across Carlo's chest. Dark stains spreading across forest green shirt turned black in streetlight. Then he was falling. I caught him before he hit pavement. Eased him down while my brain shifted into emergency mode. Medical training overtaking panic. Chest wound. Upper right quadrant. Bleeding badly but not arterial. Pressure. Needed pressure. I ripped off my jacket, pressed it against the wound with both hands. Stay with me. Carlo, stay with me. His eyes focused on mine, glazed but aware. Called. Dominic. Sirens in the distance getting closer. The attackers had fled. Just me and Carlo and spreading pool of blood that felt warm against my knees soaking through jeans. I kept pressure, kept talking, kept him conscious through sheer force of will until paramedics arrived and pried my hands away to take over. The hospital waiting room had fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead. I sat in a plastic chair wearing scrubs someone had given me. My bloody clothes sealed in evidence bags, hands scrubbed clean, but still feeling like they were covered in Carlo's blood. Dominic exploded through the emergency entrance at 10:43 p.m. He saw me first, crossed the space in 4 long strides, pulled me up from the chair, hands framing my face while eyes searched for injuries he wouldn't find. Are you hurt? No. Carlo took the bullet. They tried to grab me, he intervened. They shot him. Words tumbling out disconnected, shock finally catching up. Upper right chest, missed major vessels but punctured lung. They took him straight to surgery. I used pressure, kept him stable until paramedics arrived. But I don't know if... You did everything right. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, gesture so gentle it broke something loose in my chest. You're safe. That's what matters. Carlo has a daughter. He told me. 8 years old. Plays soccer. I was crying now. Didn't remember starting. He almost died protecting me from a threat that only exists because I recognized poison in a drink. He chose this job knowing the risks. That doesn't minimize what happened, but it means this isn't your fault. Dominic pulled me against his chest, arms wrapping around me with surprising tenderness. You're coming home with me. Not a discussion. You're not safe in Alston, and I need you somewhere I can guarantee protection. I should have argued. Should have insisted on independence, normalcy, maintaining boundaries between his world and mine. Instead, I nodded against his shoulder and let him lead me out of the hospital toward a life I didn't understand, but couldn't seem to escape. 3 weeks inside Dominic's Brookline mansion taught me that luxury doesn't eliminate anxiety. It just upholsters it in expensive fabrics and serves it with better wine. The estate sprawled across 2 acres of prime real estate, surrounded by walls that looked decorative, but definitely weren't. Security cameras monitored every approach. Guards rotated shifts with military precision. The house itself was all hardwood floors and crown molding. the kind of place where even the guest bathroom had better fixtures than my entire Alston apartment. Dominic gave me the entire west wing. Bedroom, private bathroom, sitting area with windows overlooking gardens currently dormant for winter. He respected boundaries I hadn't even needed to articulate. Never entering without knocking, never pressuring proximity beyond what I initiated, which somehow made the proximity harder to resist. Carlo recovered in a medical suite on the first floor. Dominic had converted what was probably meant to be a library into a fully equipped recovery room, complete with hospital bed, monitoring equipment, and a nurse who checked vitals every 4 hours. The bullet had punctured his right lung, missed his heart by 3 inches, required surgery that lasted 6 hours, and would need at least 6 weeks of careful healing before he could return to active duty. I visited him daily, partly from guilt, mostly from genuine concern for the man who'd taken a bullet protecting me from consequences I still didn't fully understand. Friday of the 3rd week, I found him sitting up in bed. Color finally returned to his face. His daughter's soccer photos covered the bedside table. Blonde girl with gap-toothed grin wearing jersey number 7. Her name's Sophia, he said, catching me looking. She's 8. Plays midfielder for her elementary school team. Has a mean right foot and absolutely no fear on the field. She's beautiful. I settled into the chair beside his bed. Does she know what happened? That Daddy got hurt at work and needs to rest for a while. Her mother, my ex-wife, knows more, but we agreed to keep details age-appropriate. He shifted carefully, wincing at the movement. I want to thank you. For the first aid, for staying calm, for probably saving my life before the paramedics arrived. You took the bullet protecting me. That seems like it balances the scales. Not how it works. You didn't ask for this situation. I chose this job knowing the risks. He paused. Dominic's a good man, despite what he does for a living. He'll keep you safe. Trust that even when trusting him feels impossible. The words stayed with me long after I left Carlo's room. Sundays became ritual adapted for circumstances. I couldn't visit Mom in person. Security risks remained too high, but video calls maintained connection across the distance. Every Sunday at 10 a.m., I'd settle into the sitting area with my laptop, and Mom would answer from her kitchen in Quincy. You look tired, she observed during the 3rd week's call. I'm fine, just adjusting. Not technically a lie. Adjusting to living in a mansion with criminals. Her tone carried the sharp edge she reserved for situations where politeness had been exhausted. Adjusting to not being able to leave. It's temporary, Mom. I promise. Your promises don't control other people's violence, Haley. She softened slightly. I'm just worried. This isn't the life I wanted for you. It's not the life I wanted either. But it's the life I have right now. And I'm making the best of it. I shifted the laptop to show her the view from my windows. Look, I have access to gardens. Security everywhere. 3 meals a day I don't have to cook. It could be worse. It could also be better. It should be better. She wasn't wrong. But explaining that simple right and wrong had become complicated in ways I was still processing, felt beyond my current emotional capacity. The distillery occupied the entire basement. Dominic had converted what was probably meant to be wine storage into a functional whiskey production facility. Copper stills, aging barrels, temperature-controlled environments, equipment that suggested serious investment in the hobby. I discovered it by accident Tuesday of the 2nd week, following stairs I'd assumed led to laundry. Instead, I found Dominic monitoring fermentation tanks with the focused attention he applied to everything. Chemistry lab? I asked from the doorway. He turned, surprise flickering across his expression before settling into something that might have been pleasure. Whiskey distillery. Started it 5 years ago as stress relief. Turns out chemical processes are remarkably meditative when they're not related to business. I moved closer, examining the setup with professional interest. You understand you're basically doing organic chemistry, right? Fermentation, distillation, oxidation reactions during barrel aging. All of it applies principles I studied for 4 years. Then maybe you can tell me why this batch tastes off. He poured a sample into a glass, handed it to me. Should be ready, but something's not right. I swirled, sniffed, tasted, let the liquid coat my tongue while analyzing flavor compounds. You're getting sulfur notes. Probably from stressed yeast during fermentation. Temperature spike, maybe? or contamination in the mash. His eyebrows rose. You can taste that? I can identify molecular signatures. Sulfur compounds are distinctive. I set down the glass. You need to control your fermentation temperature more precisely. Even a few degrees variance can stress the yeast, produce off flavors that persist through distillation. Show me. So I did. Spent 3 hours that night explaining biochemistry of fermentation, optimal temperature ranges for different yeast strains, how copper in the still helped remove volatile sulfur compounds through chemical bonding. Dominic absorbed information like he'd been waiting years for someone to explain the science behind his art. It became routine. After dinner, we'd descend to the distillery. I'd teach chemistry. He'd share traditional distilling techniques passed down through his family. We'd experiment with grain combinations, barrel char levels, aging processes. The work felt natural, collaborative. The first thing in 3 weeks that didn't carry undertones of danger or obligation. Tuesday of the 3rd week, I asked about the scar on his chin again. This time he answered with more detail. I was 7. Thought I was invincible. Decided to jump a curb on my bike at full speed. Physics disagreed violently. He touched the vertical line reflexively. Needed 12 stitches. My father didn't take me to the hospital for 3 hours because he was in a meeting he couldn't leave. When he finally did, he told me the scar would remind me that consequences don't care about confidence. That's harsh for a 7-year-old. He was preparing me for leadership in a world that doesn't forgive weakness. Dominic's voice stayed neutral, factual. Looking back, I understand what he was doing. Doesn't mean I agreed with his methods. Tell me about Anna. The question emerged before I could reconsider its wisdom. His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, met her at a charity function. She worked for an education nonprofit. Spent her days fighting for funding that would never be adequate. She had this optimism that felt impossible given what she witnessed daily. I fell for her immediately. How long were you married? 6 years. She wanted children, a house somewhere quiet, distance from family business. I kept promising soon. After this deal. After that territory consolidation. Always soon. Never now. He stared at the aging barrel in front of us. She died 3 years ago on Route 93. Drunk driver crossed the median during rush hour. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. I'm sorry. Words felt inadequate, but nothing else existed to offer. She deserved better than I gave her. Better than delayed promises and a husband who prioritized business over building the life she wanted. He finally looked at me. That's why I don't make promises I can't keep anymore. Silence stretched between us, heavy with shared understanding of how life derails plans no amount of money or power can prevent. My mom survived cancer 5 years ago, I said quietly. Stage 3, aggressive treatment, odds that made doctors use phrases like cautiously optimistic, which is code for probably terminal. But she survived. $68,000 in debt even after insurance, but she survived. That's why you're bartending instead of using your degree. That's why I'm doing whatever pays immediately. Research positions don't cover both rent and 4-figure monthly payments. So I mixed drinks and told myself it was temporary until temporary became permanent. I picked up one of the chemical testing kits, examined it unnecessarily. I spent years being angry at the system that monetizes survival, at the driver who caused the accident that killed my parents 5 years earlier, leaving me as her only family, at myself for not being able to fix problems that required money I didn't have. Your parents died in an accident too? Drunk driver on Route 80. Back then we still lived in New Jersey, just off I-80. We moved to Boston the year after. He got 18 months for vehicular manslaughter, served 9. Mom got cancer the next year. Sometimes I wonder if grief can trigger cellular mutations, if loss literally makes you sick. No scientific evidence for it, but the timing felt connected. Dominic moved closer, not touching, but near enough that I felt his presence like heat. You've carried weight nobody should carry alone. So have you. Different weight. I chose this life. You had it forced on you by circumstances beyond your control. Does it matter? I met his eyes. Choice or circumstance. We both ended up in places we didn't plan to be, doing things we never imagined, trying to survive situations that should have broken us. Except you're not broken. Bent, maybe. Carrying scars, but not broken. The distillery suddenly felt smaller. The air between us charged with awareness that had been building for 3 weeks through proximity and shared vulnerability. His hand came up, brushed my cheek with unexpected gentleness. "This is complicated," I whispered. "I know. You're a criminal. I'm supposed to believe in law and order and clear moral boundaries. I know that too. And I can't stop thinking about you." "Good. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you knocked poison out of my hand and explained chemistry like you were describing quantum mechanics." He kissed me. Or I kissed him. The distinction blurred in the moment his mouth found mine, careful at first, then deeper as 3 weeks of tension exploded into contact. His hand tangled in my hair. Mine gripped his shirt, pulling him closer while my brain screamed warnings my body had stopped listening to. I pulled back. Needed air. Needed space. Needed to think clearly for 5 seconds without his proximity derailing every rational thought I'd ever had. We can't do this. Even saying it felt like lying. Why? Not challenging, just asking. Because I don't know how to reconcile wanting you with knowing what you are. Because this feels like crossing a line I can't uncross. Because you're scared. Still gentle, but direct. Yes. Admitting it hurt. I'm terrified. Of you. Of this. Of what it means if I let myself want something I know I shouldn't want. Dominic stepped back, giving me space I'd asked for but didn't actually want. Then we don't do anything you're not ready for. I'm not going anywhere. These feelings aren't temporary or situational. When you're ready, if you're ready, I'll still be here. I left the distillery shaking. Made it to my room before collapsing onto the bed, pressing palms against eyes that burned with tears I refused to let fall. Everything about this situation was wrong. I was living in a crime boss's mansion, under his protection, developing feelings for him that went beyond gratitude into territory I didn't have maps to navigate. Thursday morning brought news that derailed everything else. Dominic's intelligence network had identified Yakuza activity escalating. They weren't backing down from their territorial push. They were doubling it. Planning something larger, more aggressive, designed to destabilize his entire operation. And I, apparently, remained leverage they were willing to use. 2 months after Carlo took a bullet meant for me, he walked into the distillery without favoring his right side. Still careful with movement, still healing internally, but functional enough that Dominic had cleared him for light duty. I was monitoring fermentation temperatures when he appeared, looking healthier than he had any right to given that a chest wound nearly killed him 8 weeks ago. "You're back." I set down the thermometer, genuinely pleased. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot and survived." He touched his chest reflexively. "Doctor says 6 more weeks before full clearance, but I'm tired of sitting in that medical suite watching daytime television. Dominic said I could observe planning sessions as long as I promised not to do anything stupid." "Planning sessions? You haven't heard?" Carlo glanced toward the stairs. "He's been building a counter-operation. Intelligence finally mapped the complete Yakuza network in Boston. He's moving on it this week." My stomach dropped. "Moving on it how?" "That's probably a conversation you should have with him directly." I found Dominic in his office, surrounded by papers and photographs that looked like surveillance images. He didn't seem surprised when I walked in without knocking. "Carlo says you're planning something." I closed the door behind me. "Something involving the Yakuza." "I am." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "They've escalated operations despite losing their initial assassination attempt. Intelligence suggests they're planning a larger move, targeting multiple locations simultaneously to destabilize my entire organization. I can't let that happen." "So you're going to..." "What? Start a war? I'm going to end one before it properly begins." He leaned back, studying me. "But I could use your help, if you're willing." That stopped me. "My help? I'm not exactly trained in tactical operations." "No, but you understand chemistry in ways that could give us strategic advantage." He pulled a file from the stack, slid it across the desk. "The Yakuza move supplies through specific distribution channels. If we could mark those supplies with something traceable, we could map their entire network without direct confrontation. Track movements, identify key players, build comprehensive intelligence." I opened the file, scanned the contents. supply chain documentation, shipping manifests, warehouse locations. You want me to create a chemical marker. Can you do it? How long would it take? 2 weeks to develop and test. Maybe 3 if I run into complications. I looked up from the file. But Dominic, this feels like crossing a line I've been very carefully not crossing. What line is that? Active participation instead of passive observation. If I help you build this, I'm not just protected by you anymore. I'm working with you. That makes me complicit in ways that I struggled for the right words, in ways that change who I am fundamentally. He stood, moved around the desk, leaned against the edge so we were eye level. You're already complicit, Haley. The moment you knocked that drink from my hand, you chose a side whether you meant to or not. This just makes that choice conscious instead of accidental. You're saying I might as well embrace it. I'm saying you get to decide what kind of participant you want to be. Victim hiding in my house waiting for threats to disappear? Or active partner using your expertise to help resolve the situation that put you here? He paused. Either choice is valid, but only one gives you control. He was right. And I hated that he was right. If I do this, I need proper equipment. Real laboratory setup, not improvised distillery tools. Done. I'll have industrial-grade equipment delivered and installed in the East Wing by tomorrow afternoon. He touched my hand. Brief contact that somehow felt more intimate than anything we'd done in the distillery weeks ago. Thank you. The equipment arrived as promised. An entire room converted into functional chemistry lab complete with precision scales, analytical instruments, chemical storage, ventilation systems that probably violated several residential building codes. Dominic had spared no expense, which made sense for someone whose business regularly required discreet access to specialized resources. I spent 2 weeks adapting fluorescent markers used in currency printing, modified the molecular structure just enough to shift the wavelength signature outside standard detection ranges, created something that would glow under very specific light frequencies, but remain invisible to conventional UV scanners. The chemistry was elegant, complex enough to avoid accidental discovery, but simple enough to be stable in various environmental conditions. Dominic watched me work sometimes, asking questions about process and methodology. I explained reaction mechanisms, bonding principles, how slight changes in molecular geometry created dramatic differences in optical properties. He absorbed information with the focused attention he applied to everything, occasionally offering observations from his own distilling experience that surprisingly applied to what I was doing. This reminds me of barrel char chemistry, he said one evening, watching me adjust pH levels. Minor variations in process creating major flavor differences. It's all chemistry. Whiskey, markers, poison. Just different applications of the same fundamental principles. I pipetted solution carefully. Your family must have been doing this for generations to understand it intuitively. 4 generations. My great-grandfather started the distillery in Sicily before immigrating. He said understanding transformation, how raw materials become something refined, was the foundation of any successful enterprise. Dominic leaned against the lab bench. I don't think he meant it as metaphor for organized crime, but the principle applies. By day 15, I'd perfected the marker. Dominic tested it personally, applying it to fabric samples, and tracking them through various conditions. The compound remained detectable after water exposure, temperature fluctuation, extended time periods. Perfect for infiltrating supply chains. The infiltration took 3 weeks. Dominic's people introduced the marked materials into Yakuza distribution networks through carefully orchestrated exchanges and diversions. Every movement after that glowed under detection equipment, mapping routes and connections with precision that would have taken months to establish through traditional surveillance. I watched the intelligence build on screens in Dominic's office. Digital maps showing supply movements, warehouse locations, operational patterns. By week 3, we had comprehensive documentation of the entire East Coast Yakuza infrastructure. This is better than I hoped, Dominic said, studying the data. We can provide this to federal authorities anonymously. Let them handle dismantling the operation through legal channels. That actually surprises me. I expected you'd handle it yourself. I prefer avoiding unnecessary violence when strategic alternatives exist. The FBI can accomplish what needs accomplishing without the kind of warfare that puts civilians at risk. He glanced at me. You thought I'd just execute people. The possibility crossed my mind. I'm not saying I won't defend territory when necessary, but choosing violence as first option instead of last resort is how organizations destabilize themselves. He made a call, initiated whatever anonymous transfer process delivered intelligence to federal authorities without revealing sources. 6 weeks later, coordinated federal raids hit 12 locations simultaneously. The operation dismantled Yakuza infrastructure so completely that news coverage dominated regional media for 3 days. Arrests, seized contraband, organizational leadership scattered or imprisoned. But the primary target, the man who'd ordered my death and Carlo's shooting, escaped. Carlo delivered that news personally, his expression grim. Intelligence confirms he's still active, blames you specifically for the operation's failure. Says you're leverage he'll use to force Dominic into territorial concessions. Leverage. The word tasted metallic. He thinks Dominic will abandon territory to protect me. Dominic's considering sending you somewhere safer temporarily. Out of state, secure location, until this resolves. The conversation happened that evening. I found Dominic in his study, predictably surrounded by reports and tactical assessments. Carlo says you want to send me away. No preamble, just direct confrontation. He looked up, expression carefully neutral. I'm considering options that maximize your safety. By removing me from the situation entirely, making me someone else's problem, someone else's responsibility. Anger built in my chest, hot and sharp. I'm not a package you can ship to secure storage, Dominic. I'm trying to keep you alive. By treating me like I'm incapable of participating in my own defense. My voice rose despite efforts to control it. I just spent 2 weeks developing sophisticated chemical trackers that made your entire operation possible. I'm not some helpless civilian who needs to be hidden while men handle the dangerous work. I lost Anna because I wasn't there when she needed me. I won't make that mistake again. His voice dropped, rough with emotion he rarely showed. If something happens to you because I kept you close instead of sending you somewhere safe, then that's my choice to make. I moved closer, needed him to hear this. I chose to save your life at Sapphire. I chose to stay here instead of running. I chose to help develop those markers knowing exactly what it meant. These were my decisions, made with full awareness of consequences. You don't get to take that agency away because you're scared of losing someone again. Silence stretched between us, heavy with 3 years of his grief and 2 months of my determination colliding into impossible space. I can't watch you die, he finally said, barely above whisper. Then don't make me a victim who needs protecting. Make me a partner who gets respected. I touched his hand, felt him tense, then relax under the contact. I'm here because I want to be. Because despite everything that's wrong about this situation, you make me feel like I matter for who I am, instead of what I can provide. Don't destroy that by deciding my choices for me. His hand turned, fingers lacing through mine. You're right, and I hate that you're right because it's terrifying. Good. Terror means you care. Just don't let caring turn into controlling. Deal. He pulled me closer, forehead resting against mine. But if this goes wrong, then we handle it together. Not me hiding somewhere while you fight alone, but both of us facing whatever comes next. I kissed him. Brief contact that somehow communicated more than words. That's what partners do. 3 months since that rainy Thursday night at Sapphire Lounge, I found myself preparing to be bait. The plan was Dominic's, but I'd insisted on participating. The Yakuza leader, Kenji Yamamoto, intelligence finally gave us a name, had evaded federal capture and remained fixated on me specifically. Not as collateral damage, but as primary target. The person he blamed for the destruction of his entire East Coast operation. He wants you alive initially, Dominic explained, spreading surveillance photos across his desk. Leverage requires living hostages. That gives us a tactical window where he'll prioritize capture over elimination. And you're certain he'll take the bait? I studied the photos, trying to match faces to the threat they represented. His obsession with you has become personal instead of strategic. Personal makes people reckless. Dominic's finger tapped one particular image. We leak information through channels we know he monitors. Suggest you're meeting someone at a specific warehouse location. That security will be minimal. He'll come personally because he doesn't trust subordinates with something this important to him. Carlo, fully recovered now and back to active duty, added his assessment. The warehouse is territory we control completely. Every approach monitored, every exit covered. He walks in thinking he has advantage. Discovers too late he's walked into an ambush. The chemical component was my contribution. I'd developed a gas that caused temporary disorientation without lasting harm. Essentially weaponized vertigo at molecular level. Release it in enclosed space. Anyone without proper respiratory protection would lose equilibrium for approximately 15 minutes. Long enough to neutralize threats without requiring the kind of violence that left bodies. You won't be in the warehouse when it happens, Dominic stated, not asked. Yes, I will. I'd anticipated this argument. Not in the line of fire, but present. You said partnership means trust. This is me trusting your tactical planning while you trust that I can handle witnessing what happens next. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Progress. The warehouse was in Charlestown, industrial district, where abandoned buildings outnumbered functional ones. Dominic's people had been using it as storage for legitimate shipping overflow, which made its availability plausible. I arrived 2 hours before the scheduled meeting, positioned in a secure observation room on the second floor with clear view of the main floor below. Carlo stayed with me, armed and alert. You change your mind at any point, we extract you immediately. No judgment, no questions. I'm not changing my mind. The Yakuza arrived at 7:43 p.m. 6 men total, including Yamamoto, who I recognized from intelligence photos. Mid-40s, moving with the kind of confidence that came from decades of violence going unpunished. They entered carefully, weapons drawn, scanning for traps they wouldn't find until too late. Dominic's voice came through the earpiece Carlo and I wore. Gas deploys in 30 seconds. Haley, you're about to see people lose consciousness. Remember they chose this confrontation. I watched the release happen. Invisible dispersal from vents nobody had noticed. Within seconds, the Yakuza team started showing effects. Stumbling, reaching for walls, weapons dropping as coordination failed. Yamamoto realized what was happening, tried shouting orders his men couldn't follow through disorientation that made standing difficult. Dominic's team entered from multiple points. No gunfire, just controlled force against targets who couldn't effectively resist. They secured weapons, restrained the incapacitated men with professional efficiency. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. Except Yamamoto. He'd positioned himself near me somehow. Either luck or tactical awareness I hadn't credited him with. Must have tracked which direction I was watching from. Used the chaos to close distance. He burst through the observation room door before Carlo could fully react. Grabbed me with strength that drove air from my lungs, pressed something sharp against my throat. A knife. Of course he had a backup weapon. Tell them to back down or I open her throat. His English carried heavy accent but clear intent. Carlo's gun was already drawn, aimed, but Yamamoto had positioned himself perfectly. Using me as shield, any shot risked hitting me instead of him. Through the window, I saw Dominic looking up, calculating odds with speed that suggested he'd wargamed this exact scenario. His hand rose, signaling his team to hold position. You destroyed everything. Yamamoto's breath was hot against my ear, reeking of rage and desperation. Months of planning, millions in investment, connections that took years to build. All gone because one woman recognized poison. You tried to murder someone in my workplace. My voice came out steadier than I felt. What did you expect? Compliance, fear. The reactions normal people have to organized crime. The knife pressed harder, stinging. Not chemistry lessons and federal raids. I remembered what Dominic had taught me during those first weeks in his mansion. Basic self-defense. Not because he expected me to fight, but because agency required capability. Weight distribution, leverage points, how to exploit an attacker's expectations of victim behavior. I dropped suddenly, full dead weight, breaking his grip through surprise rather than strength. Twisted as I fell, using momentum to create distance. Carlo fired, single shot, precisely placed. Yamamoto went down. Not dead. Shoulder wound, disabling but survivable. Carlo's accuracy was surgical even under pressure. Dominic was there seconds later, pulling me up, hands checking for injuries with barely controlled panic. Are you hurt? No. Scared, but not hurt. I touched my throat where the knife had pressed, felt warm blood from a shallow cut. Nothing serious. Get her out of here. Dominic's order was directed at Carlo, but I stopped him. No, I stay until this is finished. That was the deal. Yamamoto was conscious, clutching his shoulder, being restrained by two of Dominic's men. Dominic approached him with calm that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. You violated territory agreements, attempted assassination, targeted civilians. Dominic's voice stayed level, factual. You understand what happens now. You kill me. Very predictable. Yamamoto spat blood. Big, tough Italian, defending his territory. No, I turn you over to federal authorities with evidence that makes prosecution unavoidable. You spend the rest of your life in prison, contemplating what happens when business becomes personal. Dominic pulled out his phone, made a call. Yes, I have information regarding the Yamamoto case. Charlestown Warehouse District. Bring multiple units. He was calling the FBI, not executing, not disposing of the body in some dock, but actually involving law enforcement. I hadn't expected that. 30 minutes later, federal agents swarmed the warehouse. Dominic's people had vanished, leaving only the incapacitated Yakuza and enough evidence to support charges that would keep them imprisoned for decades. I watched from a distance as Yamamoto was loaded into a vehicle, still shouting threats nobody was listening to anymore. Dominic found me after, when the warehouse had emptied, and we stood in the parking lot under sodium lights that turned everything orange and surreal. You could have run, he said quietly. When Yamamoto grabbed you, Carlo would have covered your escape. I could have. I chose not to. I leaned against his car, exhaustion finally catching up. I'm done running from consequences of choices I'd make again anyway. He kissed me then, fierce and desperate, like he was confirming I was real and alive and choosing to stay despite everything I'd just witnessed. We drove back to Brookline in silence. I spent the next 3 days alone in my room, processing what I'd seen and done and become, watching men lose consciousness from gas I'd developed, witnessing Dominic's calm as he orchestrated violence with surgical precision, having a knife to my throat, choosing to fight instead of freeze. The sounds, the fear, the aftermath. On the 3rd day, I found Dominic in the distillery. He didn't seem surprised. I'm not leaving, I told him. I'm not running, not having regrets, not pretending this was temporary. I know, but I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to become your wife in the traditional sense. I'm not going to be the woman who stays home while you handle business. I want to use my chemistry, develop things that matter, build something that belongs to me. I wouldn't want you any other way. He set down the glass he'd been cleaning. You're the least traditional person I've ever met, Haley. That's why this works. Even knowing I'll probably challenge you constantly, question decisions, argue strategy, refuse to accept because I said so as valid reasoning, especially knowing that. He pulled me close, forehead resting against mine. Partnership isn't about agreement, it's about respect, even during disagreement. I kissed him, let 3 days of processing transform into acceptance that my life would never be simple, but could still be chosen. This was who I was now. Bartender with chemistry degree who'd saved a crime boss's life and fallen in love with him despite every rational reason not to. Complicated, morally ambiguous, impossible to explain to anyone outside this world. But mine, completely, consciously mine. 6 months compressed into moments that felt both fast and infinite. The first week after Yamamoto's arrest, I returned to Sapphire Lounge. Not full-time, 2 nights weekly, Thursday and Friday, when the place filled with people celebrating survival of another work week. Security remained but became invisible, the kind of protection that existed in shadows without announcing itself. Marcus didn't ask questions when I walked back behind the bar, just handed me a clean apron and said, "Good to have you back." His resignation had edges of relief, like he'd been holding breath for 3 months, and finally remembered how to exhale. We didn't discuss Dominic, or where I lived now, or what I'd witnessed during my absence. Some conversations happened better through silence. The second month brought the conversation I'd been avoiding. Dominic found me in the distillery late one evening, holding financial documents I recognized immediately. Mom's medical debt, itemized down to the last dollar of the $68,000 she'd been paying off in monthly increments that would have lasted another decade. I want to pay this. Direct, no preamble. Not as charity or obligation. As investment in our future. Your mother shouldn't carry this weight, and neither should you. I wanted to refuse. Had reflexive pride screaming that accepting would make me dependent, kept, somehow less than equal. But looking at those numbers, remembering every month Mom chose between medication and groceries, every time I'd worked double shifts to send extra payments, the refusal died in my throat. This feels wrong. Even saying it sounded hollow. Wrong would be watching you sacrifice everything to repay debt that resulted from surviving cancer. Wrong would be having resources to help and choosing not to use them because of pride. He set the papers on the lab bench between us. I'm not asking permission, Haley. I'm telling you this is happening. You get to decide whether we do it as partners or as me acting unilaterally while you're angry about it. I cried for over an hour. Ugly crying. The kind that comes from 3 years of pressure releasing all at once. Relief and guilt tangled together until I couldn't separate them. Dominic held me through it, didn't try to fix or explain, just provided solid presence while I fell apart. The debt disappeared the next week. Mom called me immediately, voice shaking. Haley, what did you do? I fell in love with someone who had resources I didn't. He used them. That's what happened. Simplest truth I could offer. This man you're with is complicated and morally ambiguous and absolutely serious about building a life with me. And I'm serious about building one with him. First time I'd said it out loud to anyone. I know this isn't what you imagined for me, but it's what I'm choosing. Long silence. Then, I want to meet him. Properly. Not through windows or video calls. If he's going to be part of your life, I need to know who he is. 3rd month, I brought Dominic to Quincy. Mom's house looked smaller than I remembered. Her kitchen table where we sat feeling cramped with 3 people instead of 2. She studied him with the same intensity she'd used when I brought home school projects, looking for flaws in construction or logic. You run an organization. Statement, not question. I do. Legitimate businesses primarily, with history that's less legitimate. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. Dominic's honesty surprised me. Your daughter saved my life. Then chose to stay in my world despite having every reason to leave. I'm trying to deserve that choice. By paying her mother's debts. By removing obstacles that prevented her from building the life she deserves. The debts were obstacles. He paused. I love her, Mrs. Turner. That doesn't excuse what I am or what I do, but it means I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what she's given me. Mom looked at me. Really looked. Searching for something I couldn't name. Whatever she found must have satisfied because she nodded once. You hurt her, mister. Bellini, and no amount of power will protect you from me. We clear? Completely clear. 4th month found rhythm in the distillery work. Dominic had been transitioning family operations toward legitimate businesses for years. This just accelerated the timeline. I developed chemical processes for whiskey production that increased quality while reducing costs. Real chemistry, meaningful work, building something that existed in daylight instead of shadows. 5th month, we stopped talking about the relationship as temporary or complicated and started planning like it was permanent, where we'd live long-term, whether children were something we wanted, how to balance his responsibilities with my need for autonomy. Hard conversations that felt foundational rather than threatening. The proposal happened on an ordinary Tuesday. We were in the distillery testing a new barrel char technique when Dominic pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple band with engraved molecular structure I recognized immediately. Serotonin, the neurotransmitter associated with happiness and bonding. Marry me. Not a question, but not a command either. Statement of intention, invitation to agree. I laughed and cried simultaneously, took the ring, slid it onto my finger where it fit perfectly, because of course he'd gotten my size right. Yes. Obviously, yes. The wedding was small by any standard, massive by our need for privacy. Mom attended, healthier than she'd been in years, wearing forest green dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. Marcus walked me down the makeshift aisle Dominic's people had constructed in the mansion's garden, his hand trembling slightly against mine. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "More sure than anything I've ever done." "Then I'm happy for you, kid. Really happy." Carlos stood as Dominic's best man, completely recovered from the bullet wound that nearly killed him, his daughter Sophia in the front row wearing her soccer uniform, because apparently that's what 8-year-olds wore to weddings when given the choice. The Bellini family filled remaining seats, men and women who'd accepted me not as Dominic's trophy, but as someone who'd proven herself through actions that mattered in their world. The ceremony was brief. We'd written our own vows, stripped of traditional language about obeying or honoring, focused instead on partnership and conscious choice. When the officiant pronounced us married, Dominic kissed me like we weren't surrounded by witnesses, like this moment had rewritten every future we'd separately imagined into something new and shared. Reception happened in the mansion, dinner for 30 people who mattered. Marcus gave a toast about family choosing each other. Mom cried through hers about watching me become someone she recognized and didn't recognize simultaneously. Carlo talked about owing his life to both of us, how sometimes the best families were built through circumstance rather than blood. That evening, I stood in the distillery with my husband. The words still felt strange. Surrounded by copper stills and aging barrels and chemistry equipment that represented everything I'd built here. Dominic came up behind me, arms wrapping around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. That I should have known recognizing poison would lead here. That chemistry has always been about understanding reactions and transformations. That somehow, impossibly, this is exactly where I was supposed to end up. "You regret any of it?" "Not 1 second. Even the terrifying parts, especially those actually, because they taught me I was stronger than I knew." I turned in his arms. "We should expand the distillery operation. Hire people who need second chances the way I needed one. Build something that proves legitimate success is possible for people everyone else has written off. I love the way your brain works." He kissed me softly. "Let's build that. Let's build everything." We stayed in the distillery until past midnight, planning and dreaming and mapping futures that balanced his world with mine into something neither of us could have created alone. Life would never be simple. His past didn't disappear because we'd chosen each other. My chemistry degree didn't erase the fact that I'd developed chemical weapons. But simplicity had never been the goal. Authenticity was. Partnership was. Choosing consciously, instead of drifting passively through circumstances we pretended to control. I'd started this journey as a bartender with chemistry degree, working to pay off debts I couldn't escape. Ended it as a woman who'd recognized poison and saved a life, and fallen in love with someone who made impossible things feel inevitable. The transformation wasn't complete, probably never would be, but it was mine, completely, consciously, impossibly mine.